The Chanel Classic Flap costs an estimated $80 to make. Chanel charges $10,800. That number has gone up more than 70% since 2020. Not because the leather changed, not because the stitching improved, not because they found a better tannery. The bag is the same bag. The price is a different conversation entirely. So the question this video is actually answering is not whether the Chanel is worth it. The question is, at $50, $150, $350, $600, $1,400, and $10,800, what are you actually buying? Same silhouette. 6 completely different answers. We ranked 6 bags using the same 4 tests at every tier: material grade, hardware quality, construction, and resale value. The results are not what most women expect. If you want luxury bag breakdowns based on leather, hardware, resale value, and real markup instead of brand hype, subscribe before we get to Tier 1. Tier 1. Zara. $50. Zara makes a quilted flap bag. It has a chain strap. It has a front clasp. It photographs well. At $50, it is the most accessible version of this silhouette on the market. And for some women, that is exactly what they need. Something that reads like a classic flap from across the room without the price attached to it. The material is not leather. The tag will say 100% polyurethane, or faux leather, which means a plastic coating applied over a synthetic base. It does not breathe, it does not age, and it does not develop any kind of patina. In direct sun or heat a car seat in August, a bag hook near a radiator polyurethane begins to crack and peel, usually starting at the corners and the fold lines where flex stress is highest. Most Zara bags of this construction last 8 to 14 months before the surface starts to separate visibly. The hardware is zinc alloy, which is the standard for fast fashion accessories. Zinc alloy is lightweight and inexpensive to cast, which is why it is used here. The problem is that zinc alloy hardware has a plating layer, usually a thin gold or silver tone coat, and that plating wears through in high contact areas within months of regular use. The clasp, the chain links, the D-rings, those are the first places the finish goes. What is underneath is not flattering. There is no resale market for Zara bags. You will not find them on Vestiaire Collective. You will not find a stable price on The Real. The secondary value is effectively zero, which means the $50 you spend is the entirety of what you get back in any form. The verdict is straightforward. If you need the silhouette for one occasion, a wedding, an event, a trip where you do not want to risk anything expensive, the Zara version does that job. For daily use, the math does not hold. A bag that needs replacing every year at $50 costs $250 over 5 years and looks worse each time. That is worth remembering before the next tier. Charles & Keith is a Singaporean brand founded in 1996, now partly backed by Temasek, one of Singapore's largest state-owned investment firms. That backing matters because it tells you something about the business model. This is a fashion-forward, volume-driven label built for accessibility and trend turnover, not for longevity or craft heritage. They produce a lot of bags quickly at prices that feel like a step up from fast fashion, without fully crossing into genuine leather territory. The quilted flap they make sits at around $150, and the presentation is convincing. The quilting is clean, the chain has some weight to it, and the overall proportions are closer to the classic flap silhouette than most bags at this price point manage. For what it is trying to do visually, it does it well. The material is where the tier shows its ceiling. Charles & Keith uses PU leather, the same polyurethane coating found in the Zara bag, sometimes applied over a split leather base rather than a purely synthetic one. Split leather is the bottom layer of a hide, separated from the full-grain surface during processing. It has some organic structure, which makes it marginally more breathable than pure synthetic, but it carries the same fundamental vulnerability. The coating eventually separates from the base. The timeline is longer than Zara, typically 18 months to 2 years of regular use before visible wear at stress points, but the failure mode is identical. Corners peel. Fold lines crack. The surface does not recover. The hardware is a step up from zinc alloy in appearance, but not always in material. Chain straps at this price point often use hollow link construction, lighter, less expensive to produce, and noticeably less substantial when the bag is held. The clasp mechanism works reliably, but the plating has the same lifespan problem as the tier below it. Regular contact accelerates the wear, and there is no way to restore the finish without professional replating, which would cost more than the bag itself. Resale on Charles & Keith is marginal. Occasional listings appear on carousel and regional second-hand platforms, typically clearing at 10 to 20% of original retail. On Vestiaire Collective, the brand has a limited presence. The secondary market is essentially not a factor in the buying decision here. What Charles & Keith offers over Zara is mostly visual confidence and slightly longer durability. The bag reads better in person, holds its shape more convincingly for the first year, and has enough brand recognition that it does not feel anonymous. Those are real advantages at $150. But the material gap between this tier and the next one is not incremental, it is structural. The difference between polyurethane over split leather and genuine full-grain calfskin is not a matter of degree. It is a different category of object. That gap between $150 and $350 is where the material conversation changes entirely. Polène was founded in Paris in 2016 by 3 siblings, and the brand has done something genuinely unusual for a label this young. It built a serious reputation without a wholesale strategy. No department stores, no multi-brand retailers, direct-to-consumer only, which means the margin that would normally go to a Saks or a Selfridges stays in the product instead. That decision is not just a business model choice. It is the reason the leather at $350 is better than it has any right to be at this price. The bag uses full-grain calfskin. Full grain means the hide is used with its natural surface intact, no sanding, no buffing, no corrective coating applied over flaws. It is the outermost layer of the hide, the densest part, and the part that develops a patina over time, rather than peeling away from a synthetic base. When you run a finger across a Polène bag and then across the Charles & Keith at $150, the difference is immediate and tactile. One feels like material, the other feels like a surface treatment. The hardware is brass, not zinc alloy, not hollow link chain. Solid brass ages differently from plated fashion hardware. It can tarnish slowly over years, but it does not flake, it does not expose a base metal underneath, and it can be polished back without professional intervention. The chain has real weight. The clasp engages with the kind of mechanical solidity that signals something was engineered rather than assembled for appearance. Construction is where Polène separates further from the tiers below it. The stitching is even, the seams are reinforced at stress points, and the interior lining usually suede or a quality textile is finished rather than left raw. These are not decorative choices. They are the markers of a bag built to last several years of regular use, rather than one built to photograph well for 12 months. Resale confirms the quality signal. Polène bags trade on Vestiaire Collective at 60 to 75% of original retail, which is a meaningful number for a brand at this price point. That resale retention exists because the physical product holds up well enough that secondhand buyers treat it as a real option, not a compromise. A $350 bag that retains $210 to $260 in resale value has an effective cost of $90 to $140 after use. That math does not work at the 2 tiers below this one. The honest caveat is that Polène is not a status signal. The brand is well known among women who research their purchases, but it does not carry the instant recognition of a Saint Laurent or a Chanel. If the purpose of the bag includes being identified as luxury by people who do not follow the category closely, Polène will not deliver that. What it delivers instead is a better object, more durable, more honestly priced, and more likely to still look good in 3 years than anything below this tier. For women who want the classic flap silhouette and care more about what the bag actually is than what it signals to strangers, this is where the value calculus starts making sense. The next tier adds something different, not just better materials, but a brand name that carries weight in rooms where Polène goes unrecognized. Tier 4. Strathberry. $600. Strathberry is an Edinburgh-founded brand, established in 2013, and it occupies a position in the market that very few labels at this price point manage cleanly. It has a genuinely recognizable design signature that is not borrowed from anyone above it. The horizontal bar closure, a stainless steel bar that runs across the front flap and locks into a small frame, below it is specific enough that women who carry Strathberry bags are not carrying a quieter version of something else. That distinction matters more than it sounds at this tier, because most bags between $400 and $800 are essentially auditioning to look like something more expensive. Strathberry is not doing that. The leather is full grain, the same category as Polène, but the hide's Strathberry sources tend toward a slightly smoother finish, less visible pebble grain, more of a refined flat surface that photographs cleanly and holds color well across a wide range of shades. The brand offers an unusually broad colorway selection for a label this size, which is partly a product decision and partly a consequence of working with tanneries that can deliver consistent dye saturation across small production runs. The leather does not feel entry-level. It feels like a considered material choice rather than the best option available within a tight budget. The stainless steel bar closure is the hardware detail worth focusing on. Stainless steel does not tarnish. It does not plate over a cheaper base metal. It does not change character after a year of regular contact. At every tier below this one, the hardware is the first thing to visibly age in a way that reads as wear rather than patina. The Strathberry closure sidesteps that problem entirely by using a material that simply does not deteriorate under normal conditions. It is a specific engineering choice that has long-term consequences for how the bag looks in year 3 versus year 1. Construction sits comfortably above the Polène in one measurable way: edge finishing. The leather edges on Strathberry bags are painted and sealed rather than folded and stitched, which is a technique that requires more precise cut work during production. When edge finishing is done well, it is almost invisible. The bag looks complete rather than assembled. When it is done poorly, the paint chips and the raw leather underneath swells with moisture. Strathberry's edge finishing holds. It is not the only quality marker, but it is a reliable one that separates careful production from adequate production. Resale sits at 50 to 70% of original retail on Vestiaire Collective and The Real, slightly below Polène's retention rate. The reason is brand recognition. Polène has built stronger search volume and community interest among second-hand luxury buyers in recent years, which pushes its resale prices up relative to its original retail. Strathberry's resale is still solid by any measure. A $600 bag clearing at $300 to $420 second-hand has a real cost per use that competes with bags twice its price. The caveat worth naming is silhouette. The Strathberry East-West, their most recognizable flap format, is proportionally longer and shallower than the Chanel Classic flap. Women specifically looking to replicate the Classic flap's structured square shape will find Strathberry's geometry is its own thing, not a variation on the Chanel template. That is not a flaw. It is a design identity, but if the brief is specifically the Classic flap silhouette at a lower price, Polène tracks closer to that shape. What Strathberry adds at $600 that $350 does not buy is a brand name that travels. Kate Middleton has carried Strathberry publicly and repeatedly, not as a paid arrangement, but as a personal preference, and that association has given the brand a level of mainstream recognizability that most independent labels at this price point do not have. In rooms where Polène goes unnoticed, Strathberry often does not. For women who want the quality of an independent label without sacrificing every external signal, that crossover appeal is real and it is earned. The next tier is where the conversation shifts from independent brands doing honest work to a conglomerate label with serious resale muscle and a name that needs no introduction in any room. Tier 5, Saint Laurent, $1,400. Saint Laurent is owned by Kering, the French luxury conglomerate that also controls Gucci, Bottega Veneta, and Balenciaga. That ownership context is not incidental. It means Saint Laurent operates inside a corporate structure that sets margin targets, manages brand positioning across a portfolio, and makes production decisions with profitability as a primary variable alongside quality. That is not a criticism unique to Saint Laurent. Every major luxury house operates this way, but it is worth holding in mind when the price jumps from $600 to $1,400, and the question becomes what exactly that additional $800 is purchasing. The Saint Laurent college bag and the Lou flap are the two silhouettes that track closest to the classic flap format at this tier. Both are available in lambskin and grained calfskin, and that material choice is the first real decision a buyer at this price point needs to make. Lambskin is softer, lighter, and more immediately luxurious to the touch than almost anything at the tiers below it. It photographs beautifully. It feels expensive because it is expensive to source and to work with. The problem is that lambskin is also the most vulnerable leather in regular production. It scuffs from contact with denim, marks from water within seconds of exposure, and shows the pressure of a fingernail if you press firmly against the surface. A lambskin Saint Laurent bag carried daily will show meaningful wear within 6 to 12 months. That is not a defect. It is the nature of the material, and Saint Laurent is not hiding it. But it is a practical reality that the price tag does not always make obvious. Grained calfskin at this tier is the more durable choice. The surface texture, a light, uniform pebble grain embossed into the leather, adds structural resistance to scuffs and minor abrasion without sacrificing the quality feel. It does not have the immediate softness of lambskin, but it holds its appearance significantly longer under real use conditions. For a bag intended for regular rotation rather than occasional wear, grained calfskin is the honest recommendation at this price point. The hardware is brass, YSL stamped, with a finish quality that is noticeably better than anything below this tier. The chain strap has genuine weight and a link construction that does not feel hollow. The clasp mechanism, a simple turn lock on most flap silhouettes, engages cleanly and does not loosen with regular use the way fashion-grade hardware does. These are details that matter over a 2 or 3 year ownership period, and at $1,400 they should be present. They are. Resale is where Saint Laurent earns a portion of its price premium in concrete terms. Classic colorways black with gold hardware, black with silver hardware, and select neutral tones retain 60 to 80% of retail value on Vestiaire Collective and Fashion File. Limited or seasonal colors perform less predictably. The brand has enough recognition and enough global demand on the secondary market that a well-maintained Saint Laurent flap is a recoverable asset in a way that nothing below this tier fully is. A $1,400 bag clearing at $900 to $1,100 secondhand has a real cost that begins to approach Strathberry's cost per wear math despite the higher entry price. The honest limitation at this tier is the question of what the $800 gap between Strathberry and Saint Laurent is actually paying for. Some of it is leather quality, the sourcing and finishing at this level is genuinely better. Some of it is hardware precision. Some of it is the caring distribution infrastructure, the Paris ateliers, the global boutique network, and the brand history that makes the YSL stamp carry weight in any room on any continent. That last component is real value for women who want it. It is not relevant for women who do not. Saint Laurent at $1,400 is the first tier in this ranking, where the resale market, the material quality, and the brand recognition are all operating at a level that justifies the word investment in a technically defensible way, not as a guarantee, but as a reasonable probability. The bag above it makes that case even more forcefully, and with a price tag that makes everything discussed so far look like a rounding error. Tier 6. Chanel, $10,800. The Chanel Classic Flap costs an estimated $80 to produce. The retail price in 2024 is $10,800 for the medium size in classic caviar leather. That is a markup of roughly 13,400%. No tannery in Tuscany justifies that number. No hand stitching justifies that number. The number exists because Chanel has spent decades building a brand architecture so precisely controlled that the gap between production cost and retail price has become, paradoxically, part of the product itself. You are not paying for the leather. You are paying for what the leather means inside the system Chanel built around it. That said, the physical object at this tier is genuinely different from everything below it in ways that are measurable and not just psychological. The two leathers that matter on the classic flap are caviar and lambskin. Caviar is a pebbled calfskin, textured, dense, scratch-resistant, and structurally stable over years of heavy use. It holds the bag's quilted shape without softening or distorting, wipes clean with a dry cloth, and ages into a richer, darker version of itself rather than deteriorating. Lambskin is the alternative, softer, more luminous, more immediately beautiful, and considerably more fragile. The same scuffing and marking vulnerabilities present in the Saint Laurent lambskin apply here, but at $10,800 rather than $1,400. For daily use, caviar is the only rational choice at this price point. Lambskin is for women who carry the bag occasionally and store it correctly between uses. The hardware gold tone or silver tone, both applied over brass, is finished to a standard that is visible in direct comparison with every tier below it. The CC turnlock engages with a weight and precision that feels engineered rather than manufactured. The chain interlaces leather through every other link, a construction detail specific to Chanel that distributes the weight of the bag differently from a pure metal chain and reduces shoulder strain over long wear. These are details that took decades to develop and that no brand below this price point has fully replicated, partly because of cost and partly because of intellectual property. Resale is where the Chanel Classic Flap separates from every other bag in this ranking by a significant margin. Classic colorways: black caviar with gold hardware, black caviar with silver hardware, beige caviar trade at 100 to 120% of original retail on Vestiaire Collective, Fashion File, and the Real. Some limited colorways and vintage pieces trade considerably higher. The Chanel price increase strategy, deliberately raising retail prices faster than inflation 7 times since 2020, has had the unintended consequence of making older bags purchased at lower retail prices worth more than their original cost in real terms. A black caviar classic flap, purchased in 2019 for $6,200, is now trading above $8,000 on the secondary market. That is not typical of luxury goods. That is not typical of any consumer product. It is the result of a controlled scarcity strategy executed with enough consistency over enough time that the secondary market has absorbed it as permanent reality. The waitlist mechanics reinforce that scarcity. Chanel does not operate a formal waitlist, but boutique sales associates track purchase history in formally smaller leather goods, shoes, ready-to-wear. Fragrance and allocation of classic flaps in desirable colorways goes to clients with established spend relationships at a single boutique. Walking in cold and asking for a black caviar medium in gold hardware will not work in most major cities. The bag is available, but access to it is managed. That management is a pricing tool disguised as a supply problem. The caveat at this tier is the most important one in the entire ranking. Chanel has raised its prices 70% since 2020. Quality has not risen proportionally. There are documented patterns across luxury resale communities of increased hardware tarnishing on post-2021 production bags, inconsistent stitching tension across units, and interior lining quality that does not match the standard of bags produced a decade earlier. Chanel has not acknowledged these patterns publicly. The resale market has not fully priced them in yet. But women buying at $10,800 in 2024 and 2025 should know that they are not necessarily buying the same object that made the Chanel Classic Flap legendary. They are buying the name, the history, and the resale infrastructure built around a bag that was better on average 15 years ago. The verdict: 6 bags, 1 silhouette. The answer is not at either end of this ranking. The Zara and Charles & Keith tiers do a specific job: event use, low-stakes styling, budgets that make anything higher impractical. They are honest products at their price points as long as you are honest about what they are and what they are not. Saint Laurent and Chanel are real luxury goods with real resale markets and real material quality. The question at those tiers is not whether the product is good. The question is whether what you are paying beyond the object itself, the brand history, the status signal, the access mechanics, has value in your life specifically. For some women, it does. That is a legitimate answer. The $350 to $600 tier wins for most women because it is the only range where all four variables, material quality, hardware durability, construction, and resale retention, are operating at a genuinely high level without requiring you to pay for a corporate brand infrastructure or a name that strangers recognize from across a restaurant. Polène gives you full-grain leather and brass hardware and a direct-to-consumer price that reflects what the object actually costs to make well. Strathberry gives you a design identity, stainless steel hardware that will not tarnish in your lifetime, and a brand name that has earned its recognizability without Caring's marketing budget behind it. The women who buy at this tier are not compromising. They are paying for the bag. Everyone above them is paying for something else too, and only some of them know it. Which of these tiers do you own, or which would you buy right now? Drop the price point in the comments and I'll tell you exactly what you got for it. Subscribe for more breakdowns that follow the money into the atelier instead of stopping at the dust bag.